Rita Chakrabarti.
Today at 6, Israel's Security Cabinet agrees to a ceasefire deal with Hamas, expected to come into force on Sunday. The Israeli Prime Minister is now meeting with his full cabinet with the prospect of a truce after 15 months of war with Hamas. One of the survivors, the 3-year-old boy pulled from the rubble in Gaza. We find him after his remarkable rescue. And the other main stories on the programme. The parents grieving the loss of more than 50 children in hospitals in Leeds. Could better maternity care have saved them? Is time up for TikTok in America as the Supreme Court upholds plans to ban it? The midnight marathon match. British men's #1 Jack Draper wins a 5-set thriller in the early hours at the Australian Open.
And you grasp at happiness in snatches.
And tributes are paid to Dame Joan Plowright, the revered stage and screen actress who's died aged 95.
On BBC London, after the conviction of a teenager for the murder of 15-year-old Eliane Andam, we hear from those in Croydon asking how to better protect young women and girls from violence.
Good evening. Israel's Security Cabinet has approved the ceasefire agreement with Hamas. The government's full cabinet is now meeting to vote on the deal. If, as expected, it passes, the ceasefire after 15 months of war is due to come into force on Sunday. The deal includes the release of the first of over 90 Israeli hostages still being held in Gaza. Since the agreement was first announced 2 days ago, 116 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes, according to the Hamas-run Civil Defense Agency. Here's our international editor, Jeremy Bowen.
This is the boy who lived. Assad Khalifa, 3 years old. He's being looked after by neighbors in Gaza City. And that's his cry for help, from the rubble the night before last. He was strong enough to wave. The men had been about to abandon their search. And he was strong enough to try to clear concrete dust from his mouth. The Israelis killed Assad's parents, his baby sister, aunt and uncle when they destroyed the building a few hours after the ceasefire was announced. The background buzz is from an Israeli drone. Miraculously, Assad only had cuts and bruises. He's been taken in by his mother's best friend.
This little boy lost his mother and father because a pilot flying a plane in the sky took a decision and took away all the care he had.
Their neighborhood, Rimal, used to be the richest part of Gaza City. 50 miles away in Jerusalem, the Israeli cabinet ratified the ceasefire agreement. Ultranationalists voted against. They want Prime Minister Netanyahu to resume the war. The faces of the 1,200 killed in the October attacks are everywhere in Israel. This was outside the Prime Minister's office, also a reminder that Israelis are deeply divided over the best way to get the hostages back. Netanyahu's critics say he's broken his promise to rescue the hostages by destroying Hamas completely. Instead, he's made a deal with Hamas.
Our message is very clear, that a ceasefire deal is a surrender to Hamas. We will only support a deal if all hostages are released. That would send a message to the enemy that we are the rulers.
Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition crisis is going to be of little importance to Donald Trump, who's always going to put the interests of his own presidency first. And he wants to re-enter the White House, being able to claim with some justification that he was able to deliver a ceasefire that Joe Biden could not. Now, longer term, the structure of the ceasefire could be a problem because it's over a period of weeks and months and it's in phases. And that gives plenty of time for events to happen that could be exploited by those who want the ceasefire to fail. Outside the Prime Minister's official residence, supporters of the hostages suspect Netanyahu could be one of them. They say he prolonged the agony of hostages and all Israelis by delaying a ceasefire for months.
We lost too many people in fighting. We lost too many hostages from Israeli bombs. We lost too many people from killing by the Hamas. The situation in Israel, the society become very, very bad.
Explain to me why the delay happened.
Shall I tell you the truth what I think? I think that somebody in the government didn't want that all the situation will finish because of his personally position in his life.
And who was that person?
Bibi.
Netanyahu, the Prime Minister. On the posters, they've transported happy moments from the past to the present of the missing and the dead. For the families, the wait is an agony. For Israelis and Palestinians, the clock is ticking towards the ceasefire far too slowly. Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu hasn't actually spoken since the ceasefire deal was announced. He's always said in the past that he's acted in the interests of Israeli hostages and of Israeli security. The argument against him is that he prolonged the war and avoided a ceasefire, first of all, because he wants to avoid an inquiry into those who were responsible for the security failures that allowed the Hamas attacks, and many Israelis believe, would be the number one in that. And he's also on trial for corruption, and he wants to prolong that and perhaps avoid eventually a jail sentence. Now, he was able to prolong the war, the argument goes, and avoid a ceasefire, essentially because he defied President Biden's demands that he should sign up to it. But it's become clear that President-to-be Trump has twisted his arm, and he won't be as easy for Netanyahu to defy as Biden had been.
Jeremy Bowen in Jerusalem, thank you. Here, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has warned of shocking inequalities in maternity services after bereaved families wrote to him calling for an independent review into an NHS trust. A BBC investigation found that the deaths of at least 56 babies and 2 mothers at the Leeds Teaching Hospital's NHS trust over the past 5 years may have been preventable. Mr. Streeting said he found the parents' testimony deeply shocking and chilling. Divya Talwar reports.
My world just exploded in that moment.
I wasn't listened to.
So this was the blanket she was in. We're probably never going to wash it.
When Amajit was 32 weeks pregnant, she went to Leeds General Infirmary's maternity unit with severe abdominal pain twice within 24 hours. Both times, she says she was told she had ligament pain. Days later, Amajit needed emergency surgery. A massive internal bleed was found, and her daughter was stillborn last January.
I don't want to be here. And I say it to him a lot.
Yeah.
And my whole family said, it'd be painful for us not to have you. But for me, it's like more painful not to be with her.
A trust review of Amajit's care identified issues which may have made a difference. Nearly 20 families have told us they received inadequate maternity care at Leeds. Data from the trust shows 56 potentially preventable deaths of babies and 2 mothers over a 5-year period. These deaths were reviewed by the trust, which identified care issues it considered may have made a difference to the outcome. The trust told us it cares for the most poorly babies as a specialist centre. It said the vast majority of births are safe and potentially avoidable deaths are very small. The Care Quality Commission rates Leeds maternity services as good, but a clinical staff member working there says they're unsafe. This former maternity support worker who did shifts there in 2023 agrees.
Maternity services at Leeds, I think, are truly disgusting.
how chaotic it is, the lack of listening to patients.
Fiona and Dan don't think any future CQC investigation into Leeds could be independent, with Sir Julian Hartley as its chief executive. He was previously chief executive of Leeds and in his post when their daughter died after gross care failings.
There's a huge conflict of interest. If the CQC was to say, no, that's not going to be the case, we're going to be fair and transparent and accountable about this, you wouldn't have anyone believe it.
The CQC told us it had robust policies to manage any conflict of interest. Leeds said it apologises to these families, but they say that's not enough and that change will only come from an independent review. Divya Talwar, BBC News.
Well, joining me now is our social affairs correspondent, Michael Buchanan. Very sad cases here in Leeds, but they're not isolated, are they?
Unfortunately not. I think the first thing to say is that if you're a pregnant woman watching this, then the overwhelming likelihood is that you will receive safe maternity care. That is most likely to happen. But it is the case that there are simply too many errors in maternity services in the NHS, and parents in Morecambe Bay, in East Kent, in Nottingham, in Shrewsbury and Telford and other places will recognise what we heard there from Leeds. The reasons are complex, but they've never properly been addressed despite a number of inquiries. They're to do with not enough staff, often more complex births. But essentially, a lot of it comes down to cultural issues, midwives and obstetricians not working together, an attempt to blame an individual when something goes wrong rather than looking at the wider team. The NHS Trust then often isn't open with the family of protecting its reputation, and that means that it doesn't actually learn from the incident. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, wrote to a number of families failed by maternity services last week, and he told them that he would like to imminently announce some immediate improvements, but that he wasn't happy with the proposals he'd been given so far by the Department of Health and by NHS England. He also said he was considering specific inquiries into maternity care in particular local areas. We know that's been requested from Leeds. He didn't say tonight whether he would grant them that inquiry at all. He said he wanted to fix maternity services, but hasn't outlined how he's going to do it.
OK, thank you. Michael Buchanan reporting there. TikTok, the app for bite-sized videos, which is used by millions globally, is set to be banned in the US after a ruling by the Supreme Court. There have been concerns about the platform relating to issues of national security because of the company's ties to China. Let's go live to San Francisco and to our technology correspondent, Lily Jamali. And Lily, tell us more about why this has happened and what the reaction has been.
Yeah, well, time was running out. The Supreme Court of the United States was asked to weigh in on an expedited basis, and that's exactly what they have done, deciding on a unanimous basis to uphold this law, which is now set to take effect as planned on Sunday. And we should note there were always two options available to TikTok here. One was to sell to a U.S. buyer, which they have repeatedly said they will not do. The other was to watch this ban take effect on January the 19th. And now it looks like that ban will go forward. It will affect 170 million American users of the app, some of whom have already expressed their outrage and their sadness about this decision. Many of them get their news on TikTok. Others promote small businesses and the like there. So they have weighed in. Some have flocked to another Chinese app called RedNote as an alternative. Now, this decision by the Supreme Court really places it in line with the U.S. Congress, with the lower courts here in the U.S., as well as President Biden. The finding is that this is a national security risk. The wild card here is what President-elect Donald Trump will do. He once tried to ban it himself, now says he likes it, thinks it helped him get reelected in November. The latest word from him, stay tuned.
Thank you very much. Lily Jamali reporting there. And it's been announced tonight that Donald Trump's inauguration on Monday, when he'll be sworn in as the US president, will take place indoors due to freezing weather. You, however, can watch it from the warmth of your own home here on the BBC.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear. It's always nice to win. And will, to the best of my ability, make America great again. Preserve, protect, and defend. I raised my right arm and started shouting, fight, fight, fight. So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Join us Monday for live coverage of President Trump's inauguration on BBC News from midday, with a special programme from 3:30 on BBC One and on iPlayer.
Police in Scotland have given details of a sighting of two sisters in Aberdeen a day before they went missing. Eliza and Henrietta Husty, who are two of a set of triplets, disappeared 10 days ago. Police have been searching the River Dee for them. Live now to Louise Hosey, who's in Aberdeen for us. What have the police been saying, Louise?
Well, Rita, it's been more than 10 days since Eliza and Henrietta Husty were last seen in a case which has really baffled both police and their loved ones. The sisters are both aged 32. They're two of a set of triplets and they moved to Scotland from Hungary 10 years ago. Now, newly released CCTV footage shows the sisters visited the same bridge, Victoria Bridge, around 2:50 p.m. the day before they disappeared. They then returned to their flat and it's thought they didn't leave again until shortly before they were last seen. Police say at the same time that they disappeared, a text message was sent from Henrietta's mobile phone to the sisters' landlady in which it said that they wouldn't be returning to their flat, and that phone was then disconnected from the network. Well, the sisters were first captured on CCTV at 2:12 a.m. On Tuesday, January the 7th. They walked over Victoria Bridge before turning down a footpath which runs alongside the river, and they haven't been seen since. Now, extensive searches have been taking place and are due to continue in the coming days. Police say there are not thought to be any suspicious circumstances and that they're continuing to offer support to the sisters' family back in Hungary during what is a very difficult time.
Louise, thank you. The man who served 14 years in jail for the murder of the schoolboy Jimmy Mizzen has been recalled to prison after the probation service condemned him for shamelessly boasting about his violent crime. Jake Fari killed 16-year-old Jimmy Mizzen in South London in 2008. The Sun newspaper said that Fari had recorded music referencing the murder, as Charlotte Gallagher reports.
Jimmy Mizzen, a 16-year-old schoolboy murdered in 2008 on a trip to buy his first ever lottery ticket. This is his killer, Jake Fari. The now 35-year-old has been releasing violent rap music, apparently boasting about Jimmy's death. He tried to disguise his identity and performed under a different name, but it didn't work, and he's now back in prison for breaching his licence. The probation service has said, "Our thoughts are with Jimmy Mizzen's family, who deserve better than to see their son's murderer shamelessly boasting about his violent crime. All offenders released on licence are subject to strict conditions. As this case shows, we will recall them to prison if they break the rules." Jake Fari's music has been played on BBC Radio 1 Extra, although not his songs with lyrics about murder, and the corporation was not aware of his background. The BBC has said this individual does not feature on any BBC playlists. 1 Extra has no further plans to play his music, and we in no way condone his actions. For Jimmy's family, it's been a troubling and worrying time. His father, Barry Mizzen, has told the BBC, "If you've done 15 years in prison and nothing has changed, and it has not had any impact, then we've got to consider what is the point of this. We have to trust the systems in place to do their job." Jake Fari is in jail again, but Jimmy Mizzen's friends and family will want to know for how long. Charlotte Gallagher, BBC News.
The time is 18 minutes past 6. Our top story this evening. Israel's Security Cabinet agrees to a ceasefire deal with Hamas. It's now up to the full cabinet to ratify the deal. And still to come on the programme.
Dear Defenders, I've been reflecting on these last few years together.
Erling Haaland pens a letter to Premier League defenders as he signs a new record-breaking 9.5-year contract at Manchester City.
At 6:30, calls for better access to free dentists as a quarter of young children show signs of tooth decay. And Gladiators ready, we catch up with some of the stars of the hit TV show.
The latest excavations in Pompeii have thrown up new treasures. Archaeologists have discovered a beautifully preserved private bathhouse, complete with exquisite artwork and a huge plunge pool. The Roman city was destroyed when Mount Vesuvius erupted nearly 2,000 years ago and has lain hidden beneath meters of volcanic rock and ash ever since. Our science editor Rebecca Morell has been given exclusive access to the site.
It's been hidden for 2,000 years. Now, a once-in-a-century discovery emerges. The grandest of spaces, with a perfectly preserved plunge pool. It's the centrepiece of a sumptuous bath complex in a private residence.
For a private house, it's actually enormous. It's, I think, the biggest found here in Pompeii in a private home. Think in the hot summers, your feet in the water, maybe a cup of wine. It's these spaces that really are part of the Pompeii effect. You go there and you can really imagine being there 5 minutes ago or 2,000 years ago.
The bathhouse is part of a grand residence. As well as the frigidarium or cold room, there's a changing room, a warm room and a hot room. And powering all of this was a boiler room. The water came in from the street, moving along a pipe into the house. I mean, look at the plumbing. It looks so modern, like you could still turn this valve on and off. The pipe would have fed into a lead boiler, and then underneath this was a furnace. You can still see the soot. Now, keeping all of this going were slaves working in unbearable conditions who would have had to have made sure that the guests next door were happy by looking through this tiny window up here. In another room, a woman's skeleton was found and a man was discovered close to a doorway.
I think they thought they were safe in this room and they'd barricaded themselves in. They'd closed the window, the doors. So the pyroclastic flow had come from Vesuvius along the street just outside this room and had caused this wall to collapse, and that had basically crushed him to death. So in fact, she was still alive while he was dying. And then this room filled with the rest of the pyroclastic flow, and that's how she died.
The woman was found with valuable items, suggesting she was high up in society.
Ah, and you've got the items here.
These are now kept in Pompeii's vault.
Wow.
Gold coins still gleaming, and gold and natural pearl earrings, and intricately etched gemstones, one showing the god Mercury.
When we found this kind of object, the distance from ancient times and modern times disappears. And we can touch a small piece of the life of these people.
The excavation here is now coming to an end, but traces of these lost Roman lives continue to emerge.
I'm back in this extraordinary bathhouse, and you'd start your experience here in the changing room, sitting down on these benches to remove your sandals, putting your clothes up on a shelf. But I have to show you this lovely mosaic floor with marble inlaid from across the Roman Empire, and it is just so evocative in here, almost like you can hear the water splashing, people chatting. You almost expect a Roman to wander past you and through that door at any moment. Back to you, Rita.
Rebecca Morell, thank you. Rules on mortgages could be loosened as part of moves to boost economic growth. The UK's financial regulator, the FCA, is looking into simplifying the rules, which could help home buyers secure a property. Kevin Peachy joins me now. Kevin, this sounds like good news for those wanting to get on the housing ladder, but it's not without risk.
Yeah, Rita, it was the turn of the year when the Prime Minister wrote to regulators saying he wanted ideas to boost economic growth in the UK. Now, today, we had the financial regulator came back with a 3-page reply, but one line in it really stuck out, and that was that it was willing to open discussions on loosening some of those mortgage lending restrictions. Remember, they were brought in after the financial crisis of 2008 when that exposed reckless lending and people obviously got into trouble when banks were on their knees. So I think there's plenty of eyebrows raised raised over this, plenty of questions about whether lessons were learnt, maybe questions about whether it will stoke house prices too. But lenders say too many people are locked out of home ownership. Change is needed. It's not going to be quick change. One of the FCA's other ideas, probably a bit quicker, is thinking about scrapping the £100 limit on contactless card payments, which is certainly another topic that will get people talking.
It certainly will. Thank you very much. Kevin Peachy there. The Manchester City footballer Erling Haaland has signed a record-breaking 9.5-year-long contract that will see him stay at the club until 2034. The Norwegian has scored 111 goals in 126 games since he joined City in 2022. Our sports editor Dan Rowan reports.
It's Haaland! Footballing goal machine Erling Haaland has broken various scoring records since arriving in England 2.5 years ago, and now the striker signed the longest contract in Premier League history. In a promotional video announcing the unprecedented 9.5-year deal, the Norwegian issuing this ominous warning to defenders.
I'm here to stay. Early.
With a reported salary of around £500,000 a week, Haaland signed one of sport's most lucrative deals. His manager, Pep Guardiola, who last year extended his contract until 2027, today admitting he was amazed when told the news by Manchester City's sporting director.
I said, "Can you repeat?" And he said to me, I said, "Sure?" I said, "Yes." So, good news.
And this will certainly come as a major boost to the champions, whose form has slumped this season, with the team down in 6th place.
Haaland staying here despite uncertainty off the field too, with City still awaiting the outcome of a legal case in which they've denied more than 100 charges of alleged Premier League financial rule breaches, but which carries the potential sanction of relegation.
And having ended any uncertainty over his future, some believe Haaland could now become the greatest striker in Premier League history.
Hat-trick! It's such a long contract, and it takes him to 34 years of age, I think. Then, yeah, if he does all of those things, then there's no doubt he should have the Premier League record goal-scoring-wise.
And while some will be amazed by the numbers involved, City fans will no doubt argue Haaland's worth every penny if he keeps scoring in the way he has. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
Now, 15 sets of tennis, and he's only played 3 matches. And that's the story so far of this year's Australian Open tennis tournament for British #1 Jack Draper. In his latest on-court marathon, he came from 2-1 down to beat Alexander Vukic and set up a 4th-round match against the reigning Wimbledon champion Carlos Alcaraz. Andy Swiss was watching.
He is the new comeback king of British tennis. For Jack Draper, another epic victory after another extraordinary match. He took the first set against Australia's Alexander Vukic.
So good.
But he then promptly lost the next 2, along with his composure. He smashed his racket, while Vukic smashed aces.
Oh, yes.
To the home crowd's deafening delight. But yet again, from 2-1 down, Draper dazzlingly dragged himself back. Now it was his turn to fire up the fans, and come a final set tiebreak at nearly 1 a.m. in the morning, at last.
He has done it.
Cue elation and utter exhaustion. Draper might be doing it the hard way, but he's doing it his way. Andy Swiss, BBC News.
Theatres across London's West End will dim their lights for 2 minutes this evening in remembrance of Dame Joan Plowright, who's died at the age of 95. One of Britain's most acclaimed actresses, she enjoyed a 7-decade career across theatre, film and TV, including roles alongside her husband, the fellow acting legend Sir Laurence Olivier. Our culture editor Katie Razzle looks back at her life.
On, you noblest Luca.
A star of the stage, Joan Plowright was a tour de force on screen too, here in Zeffirelli's Tea with Mussolini.
No, he didn't. You're quite right, he said English, but he was talking about people who were brave.
She won an Oscar nomination for Enchanted April as a widow in Italy.
One of my hearing aids has gone. What have we just...
Do you want one of mine? Do you want one of mine?
Dame Joan retired more than a decade ago after going blind. Later, with fellow dames, she teased Judi Dench about the parts her American agent had said he would put her up for.
And he said, well, if you do want to come over again, we'll look around for a nice little cameo that Judi Dench hasn't got her paws on. How rude.
Joan Plowright had made headlines as a newcomer to film when she played Sir Laurence Olivier's daughter in The Entertainer in 1960.
Oh, Dad.
The pair fell in love. She split with her first husband. He divorced Vivian Leigh.
Well, now, how about your private life, if one may inquire?
One may not inquire.
One may not inquire.
It's years since I cared for
A
them.
grammar school girl from Lincolnshire, Plowright had dazzled on stage.
You care for no one at all?
She starred with Olivier in Uncle Vanya, but later said she largely avoided working at the National Theatre that Olivier, now her husband, ran.
Some people are going to think she's not really right for this part, and she's only got it because her husband's the director. And that kind of niggles at the back of your mind for quite a bit. Inside, quickly, quickly, quickly.
She continued to deliver some of her best work later in life and enchanted a new generation with the Spiderwick Chronicles. She'll be remembered for her subtle, intelligent performances, one of the best actresses of her generation.
Dame Joan Plowright, who's died at the age of 95. Time for a look at the weather now. Here's Stav Danaos. Hi, Stav.
Hi, Rita. Thank you very much. Good evening to you. Not much to talk about on the weather front. It's going to remain pretty samey and benign for the weekend and even into the start of next week before we start to see some changes. A bit more on that in just a moment. But it is dry for most. It will be turning a little bit chillier like we have seen the last 24 hours. And we'll see some overnight dense fog across England and Wales, which could linger through the days. It's all because of this big blocking area of high pressure sitting across the near continent. It is dragging some very slightly cooler air from France with light winds, although low pressure is trying to push into western areas, so we'll have more of a breeze here, and weather fronts trying to make inroads, certainly on Sunday. But tonight, largely cloudy. There will be some holes in the cloud, northeast Scotland, perhaps North Wales, maybe northeast England, but the cloud across England and Wales will be very thin, so it will allow temperatures to really fall away close to freezing, a touch of frost for many here and across northeast Scotland, but not so cold across western areas because of that breeze, slightly less cold air. So tomorrow will be mostly dry. We'll start off quite grey, bit of mist here and there. Sunshine will appear, western England, Wales, probably northern England, Northern Ireland, northern Scotland, but elsewhere it stays rather gloomy, I'm afraid. Temperatures only around 4 to 6 degrees, a little less cold for western Scotland, Northern Ireland. This weather front tries to make inroads on Sunday. It could bring some rain to Northern Ireland and western Scotland later in the day, but it's much the same on Sunday. We start off perhaps some dense fog patches to watch out for England and Wales, certainly through the Midlands into southern and eastern England. Sunshine will appear again across more northern and western areas, but we have that area of rain pushing into the far northwest later on. More of a breeze here, 10 degrees for Belfast, a little less cold here, but a chilly day to come for most of eastern Scotland and England and Wales. Then it's pretty much the same as we head into next week. For the start, midweek onwards, low pressure begins to move in to bring more unsettled weather with a recovery of temperatures. Rita.
Thank you very much, Stav. And that is tonight's BBC News at 6. You can keep up with all the latest developments on the BBC website. Now it's time to join our colleagues for the news where you are. Bye-bye.